Alright, hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf. We are continuing Franz Kafka's The Trial. This is part 3 of chapter 7. Don't think we need a recap. Unless you want one, I appear in.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, so for anybody who might have stumbled on this, or might stumble on this, without having listened to the other parts, here's something to tantalize you. Joseph K. is guilty. You've probably never heard this. You should probably check out all the other parts to find out why.
And you're guilty too. You are Joseph K.
We are all guilty. But alright, we are at the bottom of page 80. Just a quick recap. So last time he went to see the painter, was annoyed by a group of girls. He particularly notes that there's one of them that's like the oldest. She's a hunchback, deformed, and that as far as Kay is concerned, he thinks she's a bitch. He goes to see the painter, Titorelli. Titorelli knows why he's there already. He gives Kay a little test, which Kay fails. Because he wants Kay to just be upfront about why he's there, and Kay, being typical Kay, when given the chance to just come out with it, doesn't come out with it, and starts playing a runaround about trying to find some way to find out about the court by getting Titorelli to talk to him about one of his paintings, which he's not interested in, but he just wants to use it as some kind of underhanded way to get information. Titorelli figures this out immediately and tells him that he shouldn't have done that. Not a good idea. Other important thing is the painting that Titorelli is working on is interesting. If you want to find out why, go ahead and listen to the last part 2. The only other interesting thing is that the girls don't want Kay to be painted because Kay told them that he was there to have his portrait taken or painted, and they're like, he's an horrible bloke. But in other translations, they complain that he's ugly, and I think the second translation makes more sense, considering the theme of this chapter. But anyways, that'll be it. So let's continue. This is Titorelli speaking. "I'm sorry about that," said the painter as he turned to Kay. He had hardly turned towards the door. He had left it completely up to the painter whether and how he would place him under his protection if he wanted to. Even now he made hardly any movement as the painter bent over him, whispering into his ear in order not to be heard outside, said, "These girls belong to the court as well." "How's that?" asked Kay, as he leant his head to one side and looked at the painter. But the painter sat back down in his chair and, in half in jest, half in explanation, "Well, everything belongs to the court." "That is something I had never noticed until now," said Kay. Curtly, this general comment of the painter's made his comment about the girls far less disturbing. Nonetheless, Kay looked for a while at the door behind which the girls were now sitting quietly on the steps. Except that one of them had pushed a drinking straw through the crack between the planks and was moving it slowly up and down. You still don't seem to have much... sorry, my eyes playing tricks. "You still don't seem to have much general idea of what the court's about," said the painter, who had stretched his legs wide apart and was tapping loudly on the floor with the tip of his foot. "But as you're innocent, you won't need it anyway. I'll get you out of this by myself." "How do you intend to do that?" asked Kay. "You did say yourself not long ago that it's quite impossible to go to the court with reasons and proofs." "Only impossible for reasons and proofs you take to the court yourself," said the painter, raising his forefinger as if Kay had failed to notice a fine distinction. "It goes differently if you try to do something behind the public court. That's to say, in the consultation rooms, in the corridors, or here, for instance, in my studio." Kay now began to find it far easier to believe what the painter was saying, or rather, it was largely in agreement with what he had also been told by others. So, just a thing to point out, everything belongs to the court. I don't think I have to explain what that means. I think I've already made that clear in many other prior parts of this reading, where I have pointed out that the whole world is involved in the trial. Everyone is part of the jury. And the jury is also the function of a judge to a certain extent, so everybody's always judging as well. So let's see. Kay now began to find it far easier to believe what the painter was saying, or rather, it was largely in agreement with what he had also been told by others. In fact, it was even quite promising. If it really was so easy to influence the judges through personal contacts, as the lawyer had said, then the painter's contacts with these vain judges was especially important, and at the very least should not be undervalued. And the painter would fit in very well in the circle of assistants that Kay was slowly gathering around himself. He had been noted. He had Wait, what? Oh. Let me read that. He had been noted at the bank for his talent in organizing there. Boy, I'm really stumbling over my words this time. Let me reread that again. He had been noted at the bank for his talent in organizing. Here, where he was placed entirely on his own resources, would be a good opportunity to test that talent to its limits. The painter observed the effect his explanation had on Kay, and then, with a certain unease, said, "Does it not occur to you that in the way I'm speaking is almost like a lawyer? It's the incessant contact with the gentlemen of the court that has influence on me. I gain a lot by it, of course, but I lose a lot, artistically speaking." Now, that's an interesting thing for him to point out. Does it not occur to you that in the way I'm speaking, it's almost like a lawyer? Reminder that in the prior chapter we were informed that lawyers are not part, or rather actually at the beginning of this chapter too, we were informed that lawyers are not part of the courts and are not recognized by the courts, and that whatever lawyers do, nobody knows that it has any effect on anything. So this idea that he's selling him, and it doesn't seem that Tittarelli is even interested in selling this to Kay so much as just spinning him a story. And remember, Kay was already warned by the businessman who told him about Tittarelli that Tittarelli's a liar, and Tittarelli's an artist, and artists and beauty are liars by trade. So here is Tittarelli kind of pointing out, isn't it weird to you that I'm talking like a lawyer? Isn't it weird to you that I'm talking like something that I'm not? And also that I'm giving you advice on, or I'm giving you a sort of tale that somebody who would be inclined to such legalistic pursuits in which you try to game the law would like. Isn't that odd? So, Kay doesn't pay attention to that question at all, actually. So, Kay says, "How did you first come into contact with the judges, then?" asked Kay. He wanted first to gain the painter's trust before he took him into his service. "That was very easy," said the painter. "I inherited these contacts. My father was court painter before me. It's a position that's always inherited. They can't use news people for it. The rules governing how the various grades of officials are painted are so many and varied and, above all, so secret that no one outside of certain families even knows them. In the drawer there, for instance, I've got my father's notes, which I don't show to anyone. But you're only able to paint judges if you know what they say, although even if I lost them, no one could ever dispute my position, because all the rules I just carry around my head. Because of all the rules I just carry around my head. Other judges want to be painted like the old great judges were. and I'm the only one who can do that. You are to be envied, said Kay, thinking of his position at the bank. Your position is quite unassailable, then? Yes, quite unassailable, said the painter, and he raised his shoulders in pride. That's how I could even afford to help some poor man facing trial now and then. And how do you do that? Asked Kay, as if the painter had not just described him as a poor man. The painter did not let himself be distracted, but said, in your case, for instance, as you're totally innocent, this is what I'll do. The repeated mention of Kay's innocence was becoming irksome to him. It sometimes seemed to him as if the painter was using these comments to make a favorable outcome to the trial a precondition for his help, which of course would make the help itself unnecessary. But despite these doubts, Kay forced himself not to interrupt the painter. He did not want to do without the painter's help. That was what he had decided, and this help did not seem in any way less questionable than that of the lawyer. Kay valued the painter's help far more highly because it was offered in a way that was more harmless and open. So, considering the nature of the court, that the court is about what and how someone is, and that Kay has not caught on to this yet, or ever will catch on to it, really. It makes perfect sense why one's being innocent is a precondition for the trial working out and being able to be helped in the first place. We'll just read along because Titorelli actually explains why this is the case. The painter had pulled the seat closer to the bed and continued in a subdued voice. I forgot to ask you, what sort of acquittal is it you want? There are three possibilities: absolute acquittal, apparent acquittal, and deferment. Absolute acquittal is the best, of course, only there's nothing I could do to get that sort of outcome. I don't think there's anyone at all who could do anything to get an absolute acquittal. Probably the only thing that could do that is if the accused is innocent. As you are innocent, it could actually be possible, and you could depend on your innocence alone. In that case, you won't need me or any other kind of help. At first, Kay was astonished at this orderly explanation, but then, just as quietly as the painter, he said, I think you're contradicting yourself. How's that? Asked the painter, patiently, leaning back with a smile. This smile made Kay feel as if he were examining not the words of the painter, but seeking out inconsistencies in the procedures of the court itself. Nonetheless, he continued unabashed and said, You remarked earlier that the court cannot be approached with reasoned proofs. You later restricted this to the open court. And now you go so far as to say that an innocent man needs no assistance in court. That entails a contradiction. Moreover, you said earlier that the judges can be influenced personally, but now you insist that an absolute acquittal, as you call it, can never be attained through personal influence. That entails a second contradiction. It's quite easy to clear up these contradictions, said the painter. We're talking about two different things here. There's what it says in the law, and there's what I know from my own experience. You shouldn't get the two confused. I've never seen it in writing, but the law does, of course, say on the one hand that the innocent will be set free. But on the other hand, it doesn't say that the judges can be influenced. But in my experience, it's the other way around. I don't know of any absolute acquittals, but I do know of many times when a judge has been influenced. It's possible, of course, that there was no innocence in any of the cases I know about. But is that likely? Not a single innocent defendant in so many cases? When I was a boy, I used to listen closely to my father when he told us about court cases at home. And the judges that came to his studio talked about the court. In our circles, nobody talks about anything else. I hardly ever got the chance to go to court myself, but always made use of it when I could. I've listened to countless trials at important stages in their development. I've followed them closely as far as they could be followed, and I have to say that I've never seen a single acquittal. So, not a single acquittal, said Kay, as if talking to himself and his hopes. That confirms the impression I already have of the court, so there's no point in it from this side either. They could replace the whole court with a single hangman. You shouldn't generalize, said the painter, dissatisfied. I've only been talking about my own experience. Well, that's enough, said Kay. Or have you heard of any acquittals that happened earlier? They say there have been some acquittals earlier, the painter answered, but it's very hard to be sure about it. The courts don't make their final conclusions public. Not even the judges are allowed to know about them, so that all we know about these earlier cases are just legends. But most of them did involve absolute acquittals. You can believe that. But they can't be proved. On the other hand, you shouldn't forget all about them either. I'm sure there is some truth to them, and they are very beautiful. I painted a few pictures myself depicting these legends. My assessment will not be altered by mere legends, said Kay. I don't suppose it's possible to cite these legends in court, is it? The painter laughed. No, you can't cite them in court, he said. Then there's no point in talking about them, said Kay. He wanted for the time being to accept anything the painter told him, even if he thought it unlikely or contradicted what he had been told by others. He did not now have time to examine the truth of everything the painter said, or even to disprove it. He would have achieved as much as he could if the painter would help him in any way, even if his help would not be decisive. As a result, he said, So let's pay no more attention to absolute acquittal. Wrong person. As a result, he said, So let's pay no more attention to absolute acquittal. But you mentioned two other possibilities. Apparent acquittal and deferment. They're the only possibilities, said the painter. But before we talk about them, would you not like to take your coat off? You must be hot. Yes, said Kay, who until then had paid attention to nothing but the painter's explanations, but now that he had the heat pointed out to him, his brow began to sweat heavily. It's almost unbearable. The painter nodded as if he understood Kay's discomfort very well. Could we not open the window? Asked Kay. No, said the painter. It's only a fixed pane of glass. It can't be opened. Kay now realized that all this time he had been hoping the painter would suddenly go over to the window and pull it open. He had prepared himself even for the fog that he would breathe in through his open mouth. The thought that here he was entirely cut off from the air made him feel dizzy. He tapped lightly on the bedspread beside him and, with a weak voice, said, That is very inconvenient and unhealthy. Oh, no, said the painter in defense of his window. As it can't be opened, this room retains the heat better than if the window were double glazed, even though it's only a single pane. There's not much need of air to air the room, as there's so much ventilation through the gaps in the wood. But when I do want to, I can open one of my doors, or even both of them. Kay was slightly consoled by this explanation and looked around to see where the second door was. The painter saw him do so and said, It's behind you. I had to hide it behind the bed. Only then was Kay able to see the little door in the wall. It's really much too small for a studio here, said the painter, and if he wanted to anticipate an objection Kay would make. I had to arrange things as well as I could. That's obviously a very bad place for the bed, in front of the door. For instance, with the judge I'm painting at the present he always comes to the door by my bed, and I've even given him a key to this door so that he can wait for me here in the studio when I'm not home. Although nowadays he usually comes early in the morning when I'm still asleep, and of course it always wakes me up when I hear the door open beside my bed, however fast asleep I am. If you could hear the way I curse him as he climbs over my bed in the morning, you'll lose all respect for judges. I suppose I could take the key away from him, but that'd only make things worse. It only takes him a tiny effort to break any of the doors here off the Let me read it. It only takes a tiny effort to break any of the doors here off their hinges. All the time the painter was speaking, Kay was considering whether he should take off his coat, but he finally realized that if he didn't do so, he would be quite unable to stay here any longer, so he took off his frock coat and laid it on his knee so that he could put it back on again as soon as the conversation was over. He had already done this when one of the girls called out, Now he's taking his coat off! And they could all be heard pressing around the gaps in the planks to see the spectacle for themselves. So, a little bit. Some stuff would say, some stuff about
What do you think's the significance of all this stuff about the window and the door? It doesn't seem obvious to me what it's about, but it definitely seems to be important considering the amount of attention Kafka gave to it.
I think it has to do with the same thing as with the offices. He is in a spiritual domain. He's dealing with a spiritual topic. And he is a materialistic person. He does not belong there. So he feels very uncomfortable. Because the painter's already pointed out many times, and even before the painter noticed it, Kafka described the room. The room is full of gaps. Like the boards that just go like directly outside. The girls are looking into the gaps of the boards. So it can't really be a stuffy room, physically speaking. To me, when K enters this, like this is describing K's own state of mind and incoherence when he's dealing with stuff that's of divine nature. He literally he can't cognize it, and since this is the realm of having to think things through and understand, aesthetically it's presented as the stuffiness of the room and discomfort. Not only that, it provides a really good leadway for K's bit by bit disarmament. The fact that he's taking off his coat. Is a bit of him having to loosen up and reveal a bit about himself, despite the fact that he's adamant that he does not want to open up about neither his case nor himself to anybody.
It's also fitting that the girls recognize this as part of the process of portrait making. Right? Like he's taking off his coat, he's loosening up, revealing a part of himself. For like a very
that's a really good one, Josh. That's a really good one. I had not even thought about that. That's a great point. That is indeed. I mean, in a way, we could consider the trial as a whole to be a portrait of Joseph K. A literary portrait, so to say.
Yeah, I'm also just like the role that portraits have in courts is like part of the public's judgment of them, right?
Yeah, it's an appearance.
It is what the public sees of a trial. What?
Yeah, it's a necessary appearance. Like you have to appear as something. So even if like you're against portraits, you're forced to be portrayed and to portray yourself in a certain way. So yes, other interesting thing that K doesn't even notice how uncomfortable he is. Titorelli has to point it out to him, and he says like, wouldn't you like to take it off? Aren't you uncomfortable? This first happened where like Titorelli made K sit down because K didn't notice how like he was just kind of tiring, just standing up. First he sat down on the chair, and then he had him sit down on the bed, and like then he, if I remember correctly, he just kind of basically laid him down on the bed, and like he made him all comfy, like as much as he could. Which is just yet another instance of court officials or people who are connected to the court going out of their way to be very kind to him and to make him as comfortable as possible and to make the process as easy as possible. And K just doesn't notice this. The thing about K saying that he did not even realize that the entire time he had been waiting for Titorelli to go and open up the window and that he was anticipating this, to me is a very important thematic point that's been hinted out through most of the stories so far, some places more strongly than others, that and that this unconsciousness that is about what he's feeling, what he is, and what's happening, and that until it's pointed out to him, then he realizes, oh, this has been the case the entire time, and I've been feeling this way, or I've been doing this thing this entire time. This is absolutely 100% analogous with his guilt. Like, this is the exact same relationship he has to his guilt. He is guilty, and he's acting guilty, and he does not realize that he's doing so. He's not realizing, like, what his actual state of mind and what his actions say about him, even to himself.
I think also there's a lot of things to be commented on about what Tenerelli has to say about the difference between how the law's written in the books versus how it plays out in reality, at least in his experience.
Yeah. But I think we should read on right here, because once he explains what the difference between absolute acquittal and apparent acquittal and deferral are, you'll understand why he makes that distinction, and why ultimately. Well, we'll see what happens. Yeah, because there's a lot to say about that, but I think it's just better for us to continue on that, and so we can get the whole picture. Sorry, were you saying something?
No, I was just agreeing that it's probably better to lay it out than to foreshadow.
Yeah. So let's see, we were... Okay, let's continuing. The girls think I'm going to paint your portrait, said the painter, and that's why you're taking your coat off. I see, said Kay, only slightly amused by this, as he felt a little better than he had before, even though he now sat in his shirt sleeves. With some irritation, he asked, "What did you say the two other possibilities were?" He had already forgotten the terms used. "Apparent acquittal and deferment," said the painter. "It's up to you which one you choose. You can get either of them if I help you, but it'll take some effort, of course. The difference between them is that apparent acquittal needs concentrated effort for a while, and that deferment takes much less effort, but it has to be sustained. Now then, apparent acquittal. If that's what you want, I'll write down an assertion of your innocence on a piece of paper. The text for an assertion of this sort was passed down to me from my father, and it's quite unassailable. I take this assertion round to the judges, I know. So I'll start off with the one I'm currently painting, and put the assertion to him when he comes for his sitting this evening. I'll lay the assertion in front of him, explain that you're innocent, and give him my personal guarantee of it. And that's not just a superficial guarantee, it's a real one, and it's binding." The painter's eyes seemed to show some reproach of Kay for wanting to impose that sort of responsibility on him. "That would be very kind of you," said Kay. "And would the judge then believe you and nonetheless not pass an absolute acquittal?" "It's like I just said," said the painter. "And anyway, it's not entirely sure that all the judges would believe me. Many of them, for instance, might want me to bring you to see them personally, so then you'd have to come along too. But at least then, if that happens, the matter is halfway won, especially as I teach you in advance exactly how you need to act with the judge concerned, of course. What also happens, though, is that there are some judges who'll turn me down in advance, and that's worse. I'll certainly make several attempts, but still, we'll have to forget about them. But at least we can afford to do that, as no one judge can pass a decisive verdict. Then, when I've got enough judges' signatures on this document, I take it to the judge who's concerned with your case. I might even have his signature already, in which case, things develop a bit quicker than they would do otherwise. But there aren't usually many holdups from then on, and that's a time that the defendant can feel most confident. It's odd, but true, that people feel more confident in this time than they do after they've been acquitted. There's no particular exertion needed now. When he has the document asserting the defendant's innocence, guaranteed by a number of other judges, the judge can acquit you without any worries, and although there are still several formalities to be gone through, there's no doubt that that's what he'll do as a favor to me, and several other acquaintances. You, however, walk out of the court, and you're free." "So, then I'll be free," said Kay hesitantly. "That's right," said the painter. "But only apparently free, or, put it a better way, temporarily free. As the most junior judges, the ones I know, they don't have the right to give the final acquittal. Only the highest judge can do that. In the court, that's quite out of reach for you, for me, and for all of us. We don't know how things look there, and incidentally, we don't want to know. The right to acquit people is a major privilege, and our judges don't have it. But they do have the right to free people from the indictment. That's to say, if they're freed in this way, then for the time being, the charge is withdrawn and it's still hanging over their heads, and it only takes an order from higher up to bring it back into force. And as I'm such a good contact with the court, I can also tell you how the difference between absolute and apparent acquittal is described, just in a superficial way, in the directives to the court offices. If there's an absolute acquittal, all proceedings should stop, everything disappears from the process, not just the indictment, but the trial, and even the acquittal disappears. Everything just disappears. With an apparent acquittal, it's different. When that happens, nothing has changed except that the case for your innocence, for your acquittal, and the grounds for the acquittal have been made stronger. Apart from that, proceedings go on as before. The court officers continue their business, and the case gets passed to higher courts, gets passed back down to lower courts, and so on, backwards and forwards, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, to and fro. It's impossible to know exactly what's happening while this is going on. Seen from the outside, it can sometimes seem that everything has been long since forgotten. The documents have been lost, and the acquittal is complete. No one familiar with the court would believe it. No documents ever get lost. The court forgets nothing. One day, no one expects it, some judge or other picks up the documents and looks more closely at them. He notices that this particular case is still active and orders the defendant's immediate arrest. I've been talking here as if there's a long delay between apparent acquittal and rearrest. That is quite possible, and I do know of cases like that. But it's just as likely that the defendant goes home after he's been acquitted and finds somebody there waiting to rearrest him. Then, of course, his life as a free man is at an end. And does the trial start over again? Asked Kay, finding it hard to believe. The trial will always start over again, said the painter. But there is, once again as before, the possibility of getting an apparent acquittal. Once again, the accused has to muster all his strength and mustn't give up. The painter said that last phrase, possibly as a result of the impression that Kay, whose shoulders had dropped somewhat, gave on him. But to get a second acquittal, asked Kay, as if in anticipation of further revelations by the painter. Is that not harder to get than the first time? As far as that's concerned, answered the painter, there's nothing you can say for certain. You mean, do you, that the second arrest would have an adverse influence on the judge and the verdict he passes on the defendant? That's not how it happens. When the acquittal is passed, the judges are already aware of the rearrest, are already aware that rearrest is likely. So, when it happens, it is hardly in effect. But there are countless other reasons why the judge's mood and their legal acumen in the case can be altered, and efforts to obtain the second acquittal must therefore be suited to the new conditions, and generally just as vigorous as the first. But the second acquittal will once again not be final, said Kay, shaking his head. Of course not, said the painter. The second acquittal is followed by the third arrest, the third acquittal by the fourth arrest, and so on. That's what is meant by the term apparent acquittal. Kay was silent. You clearly don't think an apparent acquittal offers much advantage, said the painter. Perhaps deferment would suit you better. Would you like me to explain what deferment is about? Kay nodded. The painter had leant back and spread himself out in his chair. His nightshirt was wide open. He had pushed his hand inside and was stroking his breast and his sides. Deferment, said the painter, looking vaguely in front of himself for a while as if trying to find a perfectly appropriate explanation. Deferment consists of keeping proceedings permanently in the earliest stages. To do that, the accused and those helping him need to keep in continuous personal contact with the court, especially those helping him. I repeat, this doesn't require so much effort as getting an apparent acquittal, but it probably requires a lot more attention. You must never let the trial out of your sight. You have to go and see the appropriate judge at regular intervals, as well as when something in particular comes up, and whatever you do, you have to try and remain friendly with him. If you don't know the judge personally, you have to influence him through the judges you do know, and you have to do it without giving up on the direct discussions. As long as you don't fail to do any of these things, you can be reasonably sure that the trial won't get past its first stages. The trial doesn't stop, but the defendant is almost as certain of avoiding conviction as if he'd been acquitted. Compared with an apparent acquittal, deferment has the advantage that the defendant's future is less uncertain. He's safe from the shock of being suddenly rearrested and doesn't need to fear the exertions and stress involved in getting an apparent acquittal just when everything else in his life would make it most difficult. Deferment does have certain disadvantages of its own, though, too, and they shouldn't be underestimated. I don't mean by this that the defendant is never free. He's never free in the proper sense of the word, with an apparent acquittal either. There's another disadvantage. Proceedings can't be prevented from moving forward unless there are some at least ostensible reasons given. So, something needs to seem to be happening when looked at from the outside. This means that from time to time, various injunctions have to be obeyed, the accused has to be questioned, investigations have to take place, and so on. The trial's being artificially constrained inside a tiny circle, and it has to be continuously spun around within it. And that, of course, brings with it certain unpleasantness for the accused, although you shouldn't imagine they're all that bad. All of this is just for show. The interrogations, for instance, they're only very short, and if you ever don't have the time or don't feel like going to them, you can offer an excuse. With some judges, you can even arrange the injunctions together a long time in advance. In essence, all it means is that, as the accused, you have to report to the judge from time to time. Even while the painter was speaking those last words, Even while the painter was speaking those last words, Kay had laid his coat over his arm and had stood up. Immediately from outside the door, there was a crying of, "He's standing up now!" "Are you leaving already?" asked the painter, who had also stood up. "It must be the air that's driving you out. I'm very sorry about that. There's still a lot I need to tell you. I had to put everything very briefly, but I hope at least it was all clear." "Oh yes," said Kay, whose head was aching from the effort of listening. Despite this affirmation, the painter summed it all up once more, as if he wanted to give Kay something to console him on his way home. "Both have in common that they prevent the defendant being convicted," he said, "but they also prevent his being properly acquitted." "But they also prevent his being properly acquitted," said Kay, quietly, as if ashamed to acknowledge it. "You've got it, in essence," said the painter quickly. Kay placed his hand on his winter coat, but could not bring himself to put it on. Most of all, he would have liked to pack everything together and run out to the fresh air, but not even the girls could induce him to put his coat on, even though they were already loudly telling each other that he was doing so. The painter still had to interpret Kay's mood in some way, so he said, "I expect you deliberately avoided deciding between my suggestions yet. That's good. I would even have advised against making a decision straight away. There's no more than a hair's breadth of difference between the advantages and disadvantages. Everything has to be carefully weighed up, but the most important thing is you shouldn't lose too much time." "I'll come back here again soon," said Kay, who had suddenly decided to put his frock coat on, threw his overcoat over his shoulder, hurried over to the door behind which the girls now began to scream. Kay thought he could even see the screaming girls through the door. "Well, you'll have to keep your word," said the painter, who had not followed him. Otherwise, why am I having difficulty with this word? Otherwise,
Well, that sentence is wrong.
yeah, I'll go to the bank to ask about it myself. "Will you open this door for me?" said Kay, pulling at the handle which, as he noticed from the resistance, was being held tightly by the girls on the outside. "Do you want to be bothered by the girls?" asked the painter. "It is better if you use the other way out," he said, pointing to the door behind the bed. Kay agreed to this and jumped back to the bed. But instead of opening the door, the painter crawled into the bed from underneath it and asked Kay, Just a moment more. Would you not like to see a picture I could sell to you?" Kay did not want to be impolite. The painter really had taken his side and promised to help him more in the future, and because of Kay's forgetfulness, there had been no mention of any payment for the painter's help, so Kay could not turn him down now and allowed him to show him the picture, even though he was quivering with impatience to get out of the studio. From under the bed, the painter withdrew a pile of unframed paintings. They were so covered in dust that when the painter tried to blow it off, one on the top, the dust swirled around in front of Kay's eyes, robbing him of breath for some time. "Moorland landscape," said the painter, passing the picture to Kay. It showed two sickly trees, well separated from each other in dark grass. In the background, there was a multicolored sunset. "That's nice," said Kay. "I'll buy it." Kay expressed himself in this curt way without any thought. So he was glad when the painter did not take this amiss and picked up the second painting on the floor. This is a counterpart to the first picture. This is the counterpart. Yeah. my dyslexia is acting up a lot more today. This is a counterpart to the first picture, said the painter. Perhaps it had been intended as a counterpart, but there was not the slightest difference to be seen between it and the first picture. There were the trees, there the grass, and there the sunset. But this was of little importance to Kay. They are beautiful landscapes, he said. I'll buy them both and hang them in my office. You seem to like the subject, said the painter, picking up a third painting. Good thing I've still got another, similar picture here. The picture, though, was not similar. Rather, it was exactly the same moorland landscape. The painter was fully exploiting this opportunity to sell off his old pictures. I'll take this one, too, said Kay. How much do the 3 paintings cost? We can talk about it next time, said the painter. You're in a hurry now, and we'll still be in contact. And besides, I'm glad you like the paintings. I'll give you all the paintings I've got down here. They're all moorland landscapes. I painted a lot of moorland landscapes. A lot of people don't like that sort of picture because they're too gloomy, but there are others, and you're one of them, who love gloomy themes. But Kay was not in the mood to hear about the professional experiences of this painter, cum beggar. Wrap them all up, he called out, interrupting the painter as he was speaking. My servant will come to fetch them in the morning. Oh, sorry. That was Kay speaking. So, wrap them all up, he called out, interrupting the painter as he was speaking. My servant will come to fetch them in the morning. Oh, there's no need for that, said the painter. I expect I can find a porter for you who can go with you now. And, at last, he leant over the bed and locked the door. Just step on the bed, don't worry about that, said the painter. That's what everyone does who comes in here. Even without this invitation, Kay had shown no compunction in already placing his foot on the middle of the bed covers. Then he looked out through the open door, and drew his foot back again. What is that? He asked the painter. What are you so surprised at? He asked, surprised in return. In his turn. Those are the court offices. Yeah. Those are the court offices. Didn't you know there are court offices here? There are court offices in almost every attic. Why should this building be any different? Even my studio is actually one of the court offices, but the court put it at my disposal. It was not so much finding court offices even here that shocked Kay. He was mainly shocked at himself, at his own naivete of court matters, in court matters. It seemed to him that one of the most basic rules governing how a defendant should behave was always to be prepared, never allow surprises, never to look unsuspecting to the right when the judge stood beside him to his left. And this was the very basic rule that he was continually violating. A long corridor extended in front of him. Air blew in from it, which, compared with the air in the studio, was refreshing. There were benches set along each side of the corridor, just as in the waiting area for the office he went to himself. There seemed to be precise rules governing how offices should be equipped. There did not seem to be many people visiting the offices that day. There was a man there, half sitting, half laying. His face was buried in his arm on the bench, and he seemed to be sleeping. Another man was standing in the half-dark at the end of the corridor. Kay now climbed over the bed. The painter followed him with the pictures. They soon came across a servant of the court. Kay was not able to recognize all the servants of the court from the gold buttons they wore on their civilian clothes below the normal buttons, and the painter instructed him to go with Kay carrying the pictures. Kay staggered more than he walked, his handkerchief pressed over his mouth. They had nearly reached the exit when the girls stormed in on them, so Kay had not been able to avoid them. They had clearly seen that the second door of the studio had been opened and had gone round to impose themselves on him from this side. I can't come with you any further, called out the painter with a laugh as the girls pressed in. Goodbye, and don't hesitate too long. Kay did not even look around at him. Once on the street, he took the first cab he came across. He now had to get rid of the servant, whose gold button continually caught his eye, even if it caught no one else's. As a servant, the servant of the court was going to sit in the coach box, but Kay chased him down from there. It was already well into the afternoon when Kay arrived in front of the bank. He would have liked to leave the pictures in the cab, but feared there might be some occasion when he would have to let the painter see he still had them. So he had the pictures taken to his office and locked them in the lowest drawer of his desk so that he could at least keep them safe from the deputy director's view for the next few days. Okay, That was a bit of a long thing to get that straightened out, but now we can go back and comment on this. So, to go back to the question of the difference between what is written in the law and what actually happens. The law is both symbolic of the law, but the law is as also the process of the court, and in this case, the highest court, which is the law which is unwritten, yet somehow is available to everybody. And it is that law that can give, what is it that he calls actual acquittal, which nobody is ever aware of it happening. Which would make sense, as already mentioned many times on this commentary, that the trial has to do with who one is, and to whom does this judgment pertain and have any genuine significance for ultimately, and for whom is it, who actually needs to know it? Well, the person who's on trial, no one else. It's their trial. It's for them to know whether they are guilty or innocent in the end. It's between them and the high court, them and God, or them and truth, if you want to put it that way. Them and the law as such.
But there are legends.
Indeed, there are legends of those who have been actually acquitted, and I would dare to say that those legends are the legends of the saints, saints and holy men.
Particularly people like Enoch. Yeah.
Yes, Enoch, who never died and went to heaven. God took him with him. There's another one who also didn't die and went to heaven. Elijah?
A couple. Yeah.
Yeah, Elijah also.
Rabbi Elijah. Melchizedek, but he's a special case.
Yeah.
Enoch was just a righteous man,
Yeah, so was Elijah.
Yeah.
So those would be the kind of legends. And in that, I would include people like Jesus. I would include people like Buddha. And the reason I would include them, and I think it's specifically about those beings, those kinds of people, because, as Titorelli described, when you are actually acquitted, everything disappears, as if the trial never happened. But if the trial is life, then somebody who's actually acquitted, at least from the perspective of the court and the perspective of that person, it's as if they never were. As if they never lived in this life. And this is why it's been quite a bit since, I think, we haven't mentioned this since the third chapter. There's a Gnostic element to this story, a very clear one. And this is one of them. That, this life, the life in the material world, is a trial. It is a prison, more specifically. And when if you were actually acquitted, because that the real life, the essential life of what we really are as spiritual beings, is one that is beyond the limitations of physical nature, which is spatial-temporal. From that perspective, it is indeed as if this never happened, because there's no temporal relation of before and after, or in or through. I think you can specifically link this to notions of enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment, like Buddha's, where spiritual enlightenment is nirvana, the final dissolution of the self, and the escaping of the cycle of samsara. And when you escape the cycle of samsara, it's not that, you get out of samsara and you have a life somewhere else. you vanish. That's what samsara is. That's what a nirvana is. It's vanishing.
Blowing out. Yeah, the candle.
Yeah, you blow out. The whole thing. Not only you blow out, and in you blowing out, samsara, the prison, the trial itself, blows out too.
Yep.
So it all disappears, but not with apparent acquittals. So the apparent acquittals have to do with the lower courts, which have some connection to religion, but are not exactly synonymous. I mean, there's some stuff here that's clearly related. Particularly, for example, Titterelli's offering that he could offer him apparent acquittal by simply signing a document in which he says, "I, Titterelli, hereby, declare and give my testimony that Joseph K. is innocent." Bang. He gives it to a judge. The judge says, "Oh, well, I'll take your word for it." I mean, that's the equivalent of indulgences, or that's the equivalent of, priests pretending that they can pardon your sins.
Right.
Priests can't do shit. They're not the ones who have power to do that. So it's only apparent. So as you can see, like the whole thing that you can be apparently acquitted, and it doesn't matter, because it's not the lower courts that had the final judgments. It's the higher courts. The higher courts are the ones that lead the process. So you can be acquitted and on that same day, as you get home, you're under arrest again, under another judge. So it's no good. And I think Titterelli makes it obvious that all of these are terrible options. None of these are good. And that anybody who takes them is a fool. Titterelli goes on and describes and says, the happiest time for defendants is that point in which, like, the apparent acquittal has been submitted and it's in the process of being accepted, because that's the one time in which, like, they're pretty sure now that they're going to get off. But once they're actually off, they also know that there's no guarantee that they are actually off, because it's not an actual acquittal, it's only apparent. So they can always be rearrested. So then the possibility hangs over their head, like a Damocles sword, which it is.
Right.
And Kay asked them, wouldn't it be worse if I take an apparent acquittal knowingly? Well, he doesn't ask knowingly, but I'm going to qualify this. If you knowingly take, it's one thing for a priest to tell you, "Oh, you're pardoned, you're good to go." It's another thing for you to know, and maybe you don't like you're like Kay, that you don't realize what you're guilty of, and it's okay, all right, fine. Somebody gets you off the hook, and you go on, and then later on the consequences come back again. The court can't hold that against you. But if you know, because Kay already has the intimations, like he has so many moments in which he's uneasy with the thought that he is innocent, because like Titterelli's like, "Oh, you're an innocent man, and if you're innocent, blah blah," and Kay's like getting annoyed by this, or rather irritated by it, because deep down he has the intuition that he's not sure that he is innocent, and that to make this statement so matter-of-factly is indeed something that makes him guilty. So if you took an apparent acquittal like that, it's like buying an indulgence. I mean, how many people bought indulgences back in the Middle Ages from the Pope, knowing very well that they were guilty of something, and somehow thinking that they were going to get off with it?
Mm-hmm. Right. They haven't read 1 John chapter 2. Where it says that we have one who speaks to the Father in our defense,
Indeed.
I don't know how they got away with that. Well, okay, now we know, because, people didn't read the Bible. They were just taught. They were told it. But if they could read, they would know that that's a scam. Yep. They're getting fleeced.
So Titterelli makes it clear, like, it's a no-go. It's most likely it won't make you look any worse, because it's one of the things that the court probably expects you to do anyways, especially if you're on trial, because you're the kind of if you're the person on trial already, you're usually probably the kind of person who's not gonna think that through.
That's legit.
Or just feeling desperate by any means necessary. Sure, I'll try whatever I can. Try to cheat.
Yeah. So, anyways, actual acquittal not possible. Okay, is there some reverb? Or
I don't think so. I don't hear it.
oh, that's weird. I'm hearing some noise, but
That's legit.
weird. I guess it's my thing screwing up.
That's legit.
Oh, was I reverberating?
No, it keeps playing like something like that's legit, but I guess like the recording got caught. Let me see if it happened. Okay, it keeps happening. All right, so let me stop the recording here, and then we'll split it into another one because I don't want that to get too annoying.
Okay.
All right, we'll
That's
see.
legit.